Hello and welcome, friends. Thanks for tuning in today. My name is Chris MF, aka Riot and Disorderly on YouTube. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And this is Riot Radio, a podcast where I meet with people around the Wichita area and I talk about stuff. Talk about life experiences, people with interesting stories, hobbies, and topics. Everyone has a story, and I would like to help tell them. Today is my inaugural guest for Riot Radio. I have my friend Carol Hughes.
Hi, friend.
Hi.
I'm excited to do this project with you.
Thanks
for asking me.
I'm really grateful. This is awesome.
You bet.
Oh, man. I remember the first time I met you.
I do
Rock
too.
Island Live.
Exactly.
At that James Wesley concert. Well, met officially because I used to be one of those fanatical radio fans who call in and stuff.
I know. And then you had actually called me that day and we talked about country music. And then I went to Rock Island Live. We were having a party at the radio station I used to work at.
Yes.
And you were at the party. And I got to meet you, and we've just been friends ever since.
I know. It's so awesome.
So thanks for letting me do this with you today. I think it's going to be fun.
Thanks for offering. This is like a dream come true. You're a radio professional.
A little bit of that in my background. Yeah, I was on the radio for 29 years in Wichita. All my radio life was in Wichita, which is really unusual because most people travel all around because they want to get a bigger market. I never wanted a bigger market. I just liked living here.
That's cool. Wichita is a great place.
I think it's a great town. And so I never had that desire or need to go someplace else. I just like living here.
Yeah, this is our town.
Mm-hmm.
Na, 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 na.
This is our town.
Why you're here is so that way we can talk about the paranormal.
Right. So here's the thing. Life leads you in a million different directions, right? And I went into work one day at the radio station and they're like, oh yeah, by the way, you're fired. And I came home that day and I sat on my sofa and I just bought this brand new house. I hadn't even made a house payment. And I was like, what do I do? And so I found a couple jobs I did for a couple years that paid the bills and kept my lights on and kept my animals fed. Priorities. And in the meantime, for the past 5 years, I have been on a podcast with a friend of mine as a co-host, and it's a paranormal podcast.
Ooh.
Exactly. And last year, about a year ago, we started talking about he was getting really busy and it was getting too much for him. And he was breaking off into the true crime world and paranormal, and it was just too much. And he's like, would you consider going to work for me? So at the first of the year, I quit my job and all I do is produce and post podcasts all day long. That's what I do.
That's pretty awesome.
And it's all paranormal is what I do, which kind of messes with your head at night.
Oh, I bet.
So I try to do that. I'm in a room, my studio's in a room where it's bright and sunny, but at night. So I always say after I get done, I have to go listen to Golden Girls or something like that to kind of clear my brain.
Girls, man. Love that show.
Just something to get all that out of my head so I could actually fall asleep. But yeah, so I make my living podcasting and talking about the paranormal all day.
That is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's pretty fun.
And a year ago when I was working out on the road doing construction for a company up there in Phillips County, I used to drive into Nebraska, that little town that's north of there.
Right.
I can't remember the name of it.
It's Alma.
Yeah, Alma, Nebraska.
Because you had told me, you and I went out for dinner one night and you told me, I think you'd been working in Phillipsburg.
Yeah.
Was it? And I said, oh, I used to live just north of Phillipsburg in Nebraska. And you're like, what town? I said, Alma. And you're like, oh, I drove through Alma all the time. And when I lived in Alma as a kid, I lived in a haunted house. That's where this whole paranormal thing started, was when I was 7.
Interesting adventure for sure.
Yeah, it was interesting and I hated it. I did not want to be the kid who lived in a haunted house. When you're a kid, you want to be like all the other kids, and nobody else had a house like that.
Yeah.
Nobody else had people walking around at night when everyone was in bed, and I just hated it.
Well, it definitely makes you different, and if you had an imaginary friend, at least it was a real imaginary friend. Oh my God.
It definitely did make me different. Yeah. And I think it's interesting. I talk to people about paranormal things every day and all kinds of different topics. I host 2 different shows.
That's
and
pretty
one is
cool.
ghost stories, and one is I interview people who are involved in the paranormal in some way. So it could be a paranormal investigator. It could be someone who runs a museum that's haunted. It just could be any number of things. But I think the common thread that all those people have is it all started when they were kids. There was something that happened to them in their life. And I was interviewing a psychic one day. She's here local, great woman, Cynthia Killian. She's fantastic. And she grew up in a haunted house here in Wichita.
Ooh.
Yeah. And really haunted house in Wichita.
Gosh. We have
To
to
the
hear about
fact it
this.
burned down, and they don't even know why. They rebuilt it, it burned down again. And after the second time it burned down, they're like, nothing is on that property. It's just empty now. But she was telling me, we're talking about growing up in a haunted house and how people who, I always say, people who don't believe in the paranormal have not experienced the paranormal. And she said, yes. She goes, it's not I believe it or not. It happened to me.
Yeah.
You know, it's not about believing in it. It's about that was an experience I lived. And so I think people who don't understand the paranormal have never lived through it or had a paranormal experience, you know, something they couldn't explain, something they couldn't debunk,
That makes sense.
you know.
I did back when I was going to Colby Community College back in 2000.
Which is also funny because I lived in that town too. We might be like way years apart in age, but you and I have a lot of similarities sometimes.
I know, that is so cool.
But yeah, but you had a paranormal experience in Colby?
Yeah, in this abandoned school in Jim, Kansas. I forgot exactly where it is.
Oh, it's just within 10 miles of Colby.
Yeah, I think it's like northeast or
Yeah, it's just
southeast.
right outside.
Yeah.
And it's not much of a town.
A few of my friends, we stayed there. We tried to stay there after midnight. Like the wind was howling.
So it was too much. Do you think there was something there in the house?
I think, I don't know. I like the idea of the supernatural, but I tend to lean more towards the skeptic side.
Yeah.
But I'm open to it because, when people die, they got to go somewhere. Or if they have unfinished business, they have to not go somewhere.
And when you think about it, there are the land, like when you think about the land here, what happened on this land before, my little house was built on it. People traveled across the country in covered wagons. There were Indian attacks. There were attacks on Indians. There was, you think about Eastern U.S. and the Civil War and the Revolutionary War, all these traumas that happened, when you think about it, how could there not be some lingering sort of presence?
Yeah, tell me about it.
Because I talked to a woman the other day from Fort Mifflin in Philadelphia, and it is on the site of a Revolutionary War battlefield. And the British won, but they burned down the fort, so the fort couldn't be captured. They put the flag up and burned the fort to the ground, so the British could not capture that fort.
Dang.
But they definitely defeated the Americans. Just that one battle, hundreds of men were killed or wounded.
Dang.
Then it went on and it housed people in yellow fever era. Those really, really, really sick people. It was a Civil War prisoner of war camp.
That's
so when
a
you
lot
all
of
of these
death.
things, right? You think about it. It's like, how could there not be something still around? That woman had some stories. I'm telling you.
That's
yeah.
a lot of supernatural.
It was a lot
filling
going. There was
up.
a lot going on there.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's to me, it's just really interesting. I try to debunk it first, and times you just can't. You're just a little kid laying in bed at night, and somebody walks out of the bathroom and walks past your room and down the stairs.
Oh,
And who just went downstairs? Nobody, because it was really heavy footsteps. So it was like a man walking, really like step, 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 and you could hear him like he had heavy boots on or something.
wow.
And that just happened frequently. A lot of other things, but so people, when they act like paranormal, that's a bunch of BS. Well, is it? Then what was that happened to me? Or am I crazy? And I do think there's also a fine line between mental illness and paranormal. Sometimes I think that people are actually seeing people, and that doesn't mean it's paranormal. It could be mental illness too.
Yeah. No, they're not playing with the full deck of cards.
Right. And then of no fault of their own,
Yes, that is true. A few weeks ago, I actually had an Uber passenger that I picked up in Old Town that I took to the very far west side, like northwest, like north, almost up to Maze. But she was telling me how the house that she lives in, she hears also footsteps and like some howling and stuff, like wind, like the wind howling, even though it's not even windy outside. And she said that she will not stay in that house alone.
Okay.
She also told me about the Crown Uptown Theater closing.
I thought you were going to say the Crown Uptown Theater being haunted.
Yeah. I was going to segue to that. But yeah, she said that no one will go up to like the third story or whatever.
You know, it's interesting because I'll tell you something I've heard about it by more than one person. So I know the guy who currently owns it. I know because I'm involved in the theater community here locally. So I know a lot of actors and producers and directors.
Because you're also a playwright.
I do that.
Holidays of Our Lives.
Thank you. One of my big time Emmy Award winning. No. So the Crown, there was a man, Ted Morris, who owned the Crown for years and years and years. And he did theater productions year round, weddings, things like that. But Ted was really, really attached to that theater. And one thing I've learned in both podcasts that I do, a recurring theme is haunted theaters. And so when you think about an actor or someone who loves the theater, that's their passion. That's what they live for. That's what they do. They want to be on stage. They want whatever their role is, backstage, directing. They're just strongly connected to the theater. So Ted owned it for years, died at the theater.
Ooh.
And there have been people who have seen him at the theater.
So he spent his life and his afterlife in the theater.
And it makes so much sense to me. And so there was one woman who was directing a show there, and she was at the back of the house. The actors were on the stage, and she saw a man come out of in my head, it's stage left. I don't know if that was true or not, but stage left or stage right. He comes from behind the curtains.
Yeah.
And there was no man there. And she said she knew immediately that
it was that Ted guy,
that it was him or someone else that wasn't in there. And she shut it down immediately, said, we're all going home for the day.
So how long ago was this? Like this guy owned that place?
Oh gosh, I'd say within the last 15 years.
Wow, that recent?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my goodness.
I always kind of like the idea of him still being there because he just loved that theater so much.
Yeah, he put his blood and his soul into it. Literally.
He literally did. And so a lot of people have said it's haunted. And one of my friends didn't get along with him. And she actually had been in the theater and some things were like, I don't remember if it was things fell on her or near her, but she felt very threatened. And she's like, Ted, I know it's you.
Like, oh, Ted, I know it's you. Stop.
You still holding a grudge. Because I guess that sort of stuff wouldn't magically go away just because you died. Maybe you can still hold a grudge in the afterlife. I think
that's amusing.
I think that happens all the time.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I definitely want to like check out some of the area paranormal activity. I actually like that show.
For me personally, there's so many people that have paranormal stories. And what I find really interesting is that people will say, nah, I really don't believe in it. But this one time, and then they'll tell you a story about something that happened.
With no
and
real
you're
explanation.
Like, okay, then explain that. I get being a skeptic, but if you say it doesn't happen at all, but that thing happened to you, how are we explaining that then?
That is true.
You know, I think a lot of people have had something unexplained happen to them. But I always say debunk it first, see what you can figure out it might be. Try. And then maybe there's no explanation for what happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have always wondered if there's more haunted stuff because for like the longest time in downtown Wichita, there was more buildings that were abandoned.
Oh, there was so many for a long time.
And they renovated a bunch of them. A couple of them have been turned into hotels.
Yeah. And one of them, it's an apartment. It's on the north side of Douglas. I can't think of the name of it, but they put some little balconies out there. They look really nice. So one of my friends lived in those apartments.
Oh.
And I don't know, there's somewhere kind of across from the Ambassador in that area anyway. And
is it the Renew Lofts?
Yes.
On Market.
Yes. They face Main. I've never been in there. But so he's in his apartment in that building, and it's like 3 a.m. He hears a knock on the door, goes out to look to see who it is, thinking, oh my God, somebody needs help. Nobody's there.
Wow.
Right? So he goes and sits on the sofa, and then he said later, he goes, he's cussing, and I'm not going to say that word.
Yeah.
I blank you not. But a man walked into my house, and he said, I watched him walk in, goes out to the balcony, and just disappeared.
Whoa.
That's what he said happened.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
that's one of
haunted
those-
there.
I know.
How does that happen at 3 a.m? And I'm like, well, were you doing some illegal substances or something? But I don't know what happened. But that, I'm like, I'd have been moving.
Right?
I can't live like that.
Like, I live at Water's Edge and enough stuff happens there.
And it's by the jail. Speaking of,
See like a haunted jail or something.
You know, there's lots of those. And on the one show I do, the Grave Talks, talk a lot about haunted jails. You know, because
Wow.
you think about, or there's one I talked to, it's Eastern State Penitentiary in Pennsylvania. But it's like these are massive, massive buildings. In a lot of places, you know, they were used as a hospital for the
Mentally
they're
ill.
asylums. It's just funny what they used to be called. There was
Criminally
one
insane.
Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum.
What?
Yeah, I interviewed someone from there, and it was originally called a lunatic asylum.
Oh my gosh.
Right?
Wow.
And so these people would come there because, you know, if there was mental illness, they didn't know what else to do with them. But also at that time, men, you know, you couldn't get divorced. So men would drop their wives off, even their kids, and go,
What?
you know what? She is out of control. And the woman had no right to money. She had no right to property. She had no say in the marriage. This is 1800s, you know.
Oh, that
So if the
is
husband
toxic.
dropped her off, she's at the lunatic asylum because the husband said she was crazy.
Oh my god.
So when you think about places like that, and that place was also used as a jail after time. So a lot of older buildings might have been a hospital, turned into a jail, turned into a hospital again. It's just the history of some of those buildings. It's just traumatic. It's just,
quite traumatic.
you know, on so many different levels that you
That
don't think
is-
about. And one of them, and I can't read, I don't think it was a Trans-Allegheny place, but there was another one. The building was so big that end to end, as you look at the building, was 25 feet short of a quarter mile. That's how
Wow.
massive this building is. So they dropped off people there and they brought them in from all over, you know, these mentally insane people. Well, these are people that got dropped off with no intention of ever, you know, they didn't have proper treatments for people. So there's no intention of ever bringing them home. So there are hundreds and hundreds of people buried on the site.
Whoa.
Yeah. And in jails, old jails, the same thing.
That's legal?
Back then it was,
Wow.
you know, so that's how you hear stories about
Haunted places.
In Canada, there's been a lot of stories about Indigenous people. They were taken away from their homes, put in these youth schools,
Wow.
and then they found all these kids buried.
That is terrible.
So when you think about some of the history, why would it be surprising that it would be haunted?
That is
You know?
very true.
So
Do
I
something-
talk to people every day about things like that,
That is so awesome.
which is a
though.
really weird way to make a living
You get to talk about the supernatural. And,
all day.
yeah.
But it's, you know, it's really interesting because there are no two stories that are the same, but I do see some underlining similarities.
That is
in the
pretty
stories.
neat.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. All right. So now you've told me about like some of your interests in working, like podcasting with the paranormal. Let's go back to the haunted house up there in Alma, Nebraska.
I know, right? It's funny. We were talking about it. My sister now is a co-host on one of the shows that we do. And so we've talked several times about the haunted house.
That's cool.
And recently, and I think over the years, I know I've said where the town is, but most people don't really care about a town of 1,200
Yeah.
people in South Central Nebraska. So this woman messaged me just last week and she said, you know, you were saying the haunted house you lived in was in Nebraska and you lived on a lake. I lived in Holdridge. Could you have lived in Alma?
Oh, wow.
And I was like, that's exactly where I lived, was in
Yeah.
Alma. Years ago, when I was on the radio, we did a Halloween show. We were talking about the house, and I said it was in Alma, Nebraska, and we talked about several of the things that happened when I lived there. And I got off the air, and I had a bunch of voicemails. The first one was this guy was like, hey, I'm driving through, and I heard you guys talking about Alma, Nebraska, and I'm from there.
Oh.
What house were you talking about? And then a couple minutes later, he called in and he goes, wait a minute, were you talking about the house by the John Deere dealership? And I called him back and I'm like, that's exactly the house I was talking about. So it's really interesting that he even figured out what house we were talking about.
Yeah.
And supposedly the family that lived there before us, they also said it was haunted. The Caldwells. I don't even know why I remember that. And then we moved out. I was going into 7th grade. So I lived there from 1st grade to 6th grade.
Yeah.
Moved to Kansas. And I went back. My best friend lived next door. And I went back and we went over there working on the house, turning it into a couple apartments. And the man who was working on the house said, oh, so you're one of the kids who used to live in this house. And I said, yeah. And he said, did you ever feel like you weren't alone in this house?
Oh, man.
And I said, yes, sir, I did. And he said, I feel the same way.
Straight to the point.
Yeah. So it was kind of validating to hear this much older man tell me that he also felt it was haunted.
So you know that it's not just something in your head.
Yeah. And even like one night, it was a big house. It was a 2-story house. It was probably built around 1900. I don't know who was haunting the house. I have this weird feeling about getting too attached to it again and diving into the history because what if it follows me to my perfectly normal home? And I don't want that. But my friends knew it was haunted and things were happening that shouldn't happen. And we frequently went away for the weekend to my grandma's house about 80 miles away. And we were gone for the weekend. And when I got back, next day I go over to my best friend's house, Brenda. And from her family room, you could see the side of my house with my bedroom. And she says, when you were gone this weekend, there was somebody in your house.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, of course, when you're, 10 years old or something, and as you mentioned earlier, you don't want to be the kid that's different. It's kind of like eye roll. I know there's something in my house. And, because you don't want to talk about it. And if you talk about it, it kind of exists even more. But she said that someone turned the light on in my bedroom and she saw someone sit on my bed. And she saw that from her house.
Oh,
she wasn't
man.
even in the house.
That is crazy.
Yeah. So it's stuff like that happened a lot. And, someone walking around, you go into the bathroom upstairs and try to get out and the door handle would start going back and forth and back and forth. And like you couldn't get out. And it's like you're just standing there watching the door handle going back and forth and back and forth and locked you in the scariest room of the house.
Terrifying.
Something about that bathroom. It was where all the energy came from it. Whatever it was that walked around at night would leave that bathroom. And there was a railing around the staircase and walk around the railing and go down the stairs. Like one time I heard it go outside, like it opened the front door. And other times I don't know what happened to it. It just walked down the stairs and I guess that was that. I don't know. I don't know what the purpose is to that.
Went out to work for the day.
See you later.
Going haunting.
It's like, please don't come back.
Man.
Stay away. That's fine. But it was just a lot of things like that. Like one time we had gone away for the weekend, came in the house, no lights were on, and we're all tired. So we came in through the kitchen, then you walk to the dining room, kind of turn to your right, and that was a room that we called the piano room. It just had a piano in it. And then the staircase was right there. So it's a big house. There's no sound on. This is a long time ago. I'm old. So there's no sound on in the house or anything. And when we turned to go into the piano room, we going to turn the light on for the stairs. Music started playing upstairs.
Like piano music?
No, it was a record album.
What?
So when we left, we would take all the cool records that we had, because that was back in the day when you had records and 45s. Yeah. We'd take all of those to my cousin's house in McCook, Nebraska, and we'd listen to music. And then all the ones we left are the ones we didn't listen to that often, right? You probably don't know this. Well, turntables are coming back, but they used to have
vinyl's making a comeback.
So they used to have the turntables had an arm on them, so you could stack your 45s and they would drop one after another.
Oh,
yeah.
Innovative.
So yeah,
it's like a record changer.
Kind of like a record changer.
Yeah,
that's exactly what it is.
In the 90s and early 2000s, they had like the
CD,
3-disc players.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. So you could stack probably, I don't remember, there was a certain number, 8 of them, and you could drop them.
Cool.
But the thing was, when you put your 45s, or if you played an album and that arm was over and dropped, the album would only play once. If you left the arm up, it would repeat the album over and over, right?
So the
we
left the music on.
Well, here's the weird thing. So there's no music playing, and then the music starts. We turn on the lights to go upstairs, and all over the stairs are records and 45s and albums that we didn't take. And then the music started. So it was this really weird, we gotta go turn off the music feeling. Like we all have to go to bed.
Oh, yeah.
You know, this is bedtime and we've got music playing. We're picking up records as we're going up the steps. And so we get to the bedroom that had the record player in it and the arm was down. And it had started not at the first of the album. The music started halfway into the album.
Interesting.
So it couldn't have been playing over and over and over the whole time. The arm was down. And it didn't start with the first song on the album, but the music started as we were turned on the lights to go up the stairs. So I don't know what the hell that was.
Yeah.
I don't know
That
to this
is
day what that
weird.
was. Because the music couldn't have been playing the whole time we were gone.
Well, ghosts need entertainment
I
too.
guess so. It's like, watch this. This will freak them out when they come home.
Yeah.
Yeah. So very interesting stuff.
That is crazy.
Yeah, it's so funny because like houses like that house is still there, but it looks totally different. It's been remodeled and renovated so many times and the porch was taken off. I don't even recognize it now.
Wow. I wonder if they ever had a medium go in there and do a seance.
My sister went in it. She went up and knocked on the door once and said, hey, I used to live here when I was a kid and it looks so different now. You know, and do you mind if I look? And they let her in.
Nice.
And she said they had crosses everywhere.
Oh,
like
wow.
Hundreds of crosses in the house.
Oh.
But they said she's like, do you feel anything weird in the house? And they're like, no.
Just the Holy Spirit.
With all the crosses, anything that's going on.
Yeah.
It's obviously the Holy Spirit, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. They're
Yeah,
here.
with all those crosses is likely gone. That's pretty
It
entertaining.
was interesting.
though.
So it's interesting, you know, looking back at when I was a kid to now, that experience kind of pays off professionally.
Yeah.
And now that's kind of what I do.
Yeah, you get to talk about it.
Yeah. Get to talk about that and all kinds of paranormal things. It's kind of fun. You know, it's interesting too, after being in radio for all those years and then finding another comparable avenue, doing something again in audio production.
Yeah.
Because that's always been my passion. And so to sit here all day and edit interviews and line up interviews and post the shows and host the shows, it's really been fun.
And talk about all the stuff that you like, passion projects, and
Yeah.
just entertaining.
Mm-hmm. And I can always branch out. Like I have all the equipment. I could start a new podcast anytime. You know, I could do whatever I want.
That is awesome.
But it's cool when you have a friend that has a very successful podcast company and needs an employee. So that was pretty awesome.
I actually just met someone on Monday who was a guest lecturer in the class. He recently started his own podcast company. It started with him turning his basement into a home studio because he was a musician.
Oh, that's cool.
And then like he segued into like podcasting. It's pretty neat.
And you know, my friends started with paranormal and that really took off. We have 2 very, very successful paranormal podcasts. And then he started doing true crime. And it took a while to really find his footing, you know, and kind of how he wanted it to go. And there was some tweaks to the show. And then he started doing it slightly differently. And then the Idaho murders happened with those college students. And he started a podcast about that. And it changed everything, that one podcast. And for months, he was in the top 10 podcasts in the U.S.
That's pretty cool.
With that podcast. And so now he's branched out, covers more, very successful podcast, true crime, getting, you know, for a while, he was getting millions of streams a day.
Nice.
And now he's on with Nancy Grace. He's on with Ashley Banfield. So he's on TV almost every week. So it was cool for me and for him as well that I was able to kind of take the paranormal stuff and run with that. And he took the true crime end and ran with that.
That's pretty cool. Y'all are both doing this stuff that y'all are very passionate about. You get to live life and do things on your own terms.
Right. I can, in the middle of the workday, I can do this with you.
Yeah, thanks,
like-
and I appreciate that.
You bet.
This
Anytime
was
you
a
need
final
it.
for
Anytime
my
you need
audio
help.
storytelling class.
Hopefully we got some stories.
Yeah.
But I think,
believe so.
you know, the flexibility of it all. But I did think it was interesting because I'm like, oh, it'd be so cool, you know, work from home. Well, when you work from home, you never leave for work, but you never leave work.
Tell me about
You
it.
know, so I feel like I'll be watching TV at night and I'm like, man, I could real quick go edit that stuff and get it posted right now. And that's one less thing I got to do tomorrow.
Yeah.
So, but then, you know, I'm home and I've got my cats and it's kind of awesome. I get to decide how my day goes every single day.
Yeah, I kind of felt like that back in 2020 during the height of COVID when school was only on Zoom and online. Actually, late last month, President Biden declared the coronavirus state of emergency over.
Today, I noticed that the World Health Organization did the same.
Well,
That now, they said it's still killing thousands of people a day, but it isn't.
there's a lot of other
Health
stuff
and-
killing
yeah,
thousands
exactly.
of people a day.
Exactly.
There's car crashes killing thousands
Heart
of people.
disease,
That's
cancer.
not declared a
Yeah.
pandemic.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot for your time.
You're very welcome. This was really fun.
This
I'm happy
has been
to do it.
awesome. Yeah, I love it. Like hearing about your podcast, reconnecting with you, because we get to see each other like once every 6 or so months
That's
or
about
whatever.
it. I always follow you on Facebook.
Yeah.
So when I saw that you were looking for somebody, I'm like, hey, I'd be happy to be interviewed if I can help in any way.
Yeah, I've always been creative, and like the last couple of years, I've been getting back to that.
Yeah.
And it's great. And the podcast is just another endeavor that I like to do because I already do the whole YouTube content creation. I go to pro wrestling shows and also rock and country shows.
Oh, yeah.
Plenty of content on there. My subscriber count has been going up. I believe it's at 416 now. Like,
Keep at it.
yeah. And thanks for listening. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Riot and Disorderly on YouTube. All right. And also don't forget to check out Carol's 2 podcasts, Real Ghost Stories Online and The Grave Talks on Spotify.
I would love that. Check it out. Or wherever you listen to podcasts, you will find us there.
Yes.
Y'all have a great day, everyone. My name is Chris MF,
And this is Carol Hughes.
and this is Riot Radio.
Thanks for listening.
I think that's it. I like the thanks for listening.